Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming along this morning. In what is a bit of a strange morning for everyone with our reduced numbers today. So, my name's Stephen Haunts, and I'm here to do a talk to you called The Spirit of Creativity, Our Legacy to the World. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about creativity. We're going to get a little bit philosophical. But don't worry, towards the end I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, because everyone likes tips and tricks at an NDC talk. So for me personally, I've always been someone that's been very creative. I like creating things, I like building things, whether it's software, music, art, Lego, lots of Lego. I'm just a person that's driven to build things, and I'd expect quite a lot of people here are kind of in the same position, because we like building things with code. And it's kind of wired into my DNA. So I'm going to touch on some of the kind of like philosophical sides of creativity and why it's important and kind of what it means to our legacy as human beings as we, go through our lives. I just want to point out that I'm not trying to change anyone's mind with my viewpoints in this talk. So you may agree with what I say, you may not, that's fine. Everyone's allowed to disagree with people. So I just want to say that just because you might think, well, that's a bit weird what you're saying. It's just another viewpoint to listen to. So I just want you to bear that in mind before you start slam dunking red cards into the bin outside the outside the room. And as I said, at the end, I've got some creativity tips and tricks, some really fun little tricks that you can do in your workplace when you're trying to put creative solutions together. Because then, when your boss says, "What did you learn at NDC?" You go, well, actually, I've got these little tips and tricks here. So I've got your back. So, what is creativity and why is it important? Two very fundamental questions, I think, to our DNA as humans. So creativity can be defined as the ability to think about a task or a problem in a new and different way, or the ability to use the imagination to generate new ideas. Creativity enables you to solve complex problems or find interesting ways to approach tasks. If you are creative, you look at things from a unique perspective. Now, very tightly coupled to creativity, we have the idea of innovation as well, and this probably something that's quite important to everyone about innovation in the workplace these days. And innovation is the practical implementation of ideas that result in the introduction of new goods or services or improvements in offerings to goods and services. So creativity is new ways to address existing problems and mediums, and innovation is implementing new products, services or ideas. It's a very broad way of sort of describing what they are. So if we look at creativity, some examples, we said it's new ways of looking at existing problems. So let's put that into context. So art, a painting is a painting. People have been doing paintings for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But even though as a medium it's existed for a long time, people always find new ways of approaching, artistic style. Everything from acrylics to oil paintings, watercolours, even more some of the avant-garde modern artists who might just throw mud at a canvas and give it a nice meaning, and then it sells for millions. Must try that. I quite like some of the creative graffiti that you get in places. Now, some graffiti, I will admit, is just vandalism. It's just people drawing rude things on a wall. But sometimes it is genuinely creative, and got some examples here. And I remember going to Spain once, a city called Tarragona, and they've got some absolutely amazing street artwork that's been probably not authorised, but it's been done anyway, and it just looks absolutely fantastic, and it is very creative. Other examples are books and novels. The book and the printing press has been around for a very, very long time, but people still do it. We find new ways of telling stories, and you can kind of see how the art of storytelling changes over the years. Go back to the 1800s, where everything was very exposition deep, lots of description. You take 17 paragraphs to describe what someone's wearing before any action happens, through today where we have much more brief storytelling with much more snappier, punchier scenes where you get into the action a lot quicker. So the styles and attitudes change, but the actual medium is the same. Again, same with music. Music's been around a long time, but we always find new ways of being creative and doing new music, depending on what your genre is, whether it's from classical music through to, IDM, metal, pop, all new ways of doing it. But even with the technology we do, my son made me put this slide in because he's massively into Minecraft. Incredibly simple concept. It's blocks that you just put down. But with those blocks and a little bit of logic that you can assign to those blocks, you can create these weird and wonderful and amazing kind of games and levels, which is really quite interesting. And when we think of innovation, I mean, there's lots of innovation that we're all probably familiar with. So the computer itself was an innovation. You know, we went from these big machines that filled rooms and had like big tapes and people in suits looking very serious, going through to then what we have today, like the home computer, you know, like things like the Apple II, you know, the Commodore PET, the Dragon 32, the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. Those were all innovations because they, even though it was an existing concept, it was a concept that wasn't really available to the average person on the street, and they kind of brought it into the home place. Other innovation examples are around Tesla, for example. Now, I know there's lots of different companies that do electronic vehicles, but the thing that really sets Tesla apart is their battery technology, and, you know, the innovation they're doing in battery technology. And this all feeds into Elon Musk's vision of trying to get us to Mars. So one of the reasons Tesla exists is to innovate the battery technology, but to do it in a profitable way so that we actually have good solar cell and battery storage for when we do our Mars missions. That's why Tesla exists, is to get us to Mars. Along with SpaceX, and I love that picture. Who doesn't want to ride a rocket? And when we look at sort of innovation in the workplace, because obviously we're all professionals and we work in professional environments, there's different ways of looking at innovation. So down the bottom axis, we have technology, existing technology versus new technology. And then we have, on the vertical axis, we have existing markets versus new markets, you know, markets that we haven't currently sold our software into. So if we look at, you know, existing markets with existing technology, then generally your innovation is more incremental. Things kind of move at a slower pace when you're coming up with new ideas. But then as you start to introduce new technologies, this is where we get the idea of disruptive innovation. Now, depending on what your thoughts are on blockchain, the idea was it was supposed to be a disruptive innovation. It was a brand new technology and a new concept that people are now trying to apply to existing markets. Some successfully, most not, but it was supposed to be a disruptive innovation. If you have a new market and brand new technologies, then you have what's classed as radical innovation. And this is pretty much what Silicon Valley tries to do a lot of the time. I mean, you look at some of the markets they're going into and you think, do you really need to be solving problems there? But, you know, obviously they think they do, and they're coming up with new technologies, new frameworks. And they kind of try to be, like, you know, radical innovators. And then one which is probably more familiar to a lot of people is you might have existing technologies that you work with, like legacy technologies within your company, but you then try to apply it to different markets. So maybe your company works in nuclear and energy, for example, but you then try to apply it to financial services, for example. That's kind of classed as an architectural innovation, taking something that you've already got, but putting it into a different area. Now, creativity, mostly, you know, we have this idea of like the left and the right brain of a person. So people who are more creative tend to be right brain dominant. And they are creative, they've got good intuition, artistic, you know, lots of feeling and imagination. Whereas someone who might be more analytical and not necessarily creative is classed as a left brain thinker. So people that are very analytical, very logical, good at coming up with ideas, love facts, love maths, love training. Now, I don't think it's not a black and white thing. It's not like you are either left-brained or you are right-brained, but people have a mixture of the two, and everyone's different, which is kind of what makes us unique and interesting to work with. So I consider myself to be right-brain dominant. I'm quite creative. I'm good at building things and coming up with creative ideas. Ask me to add two numbers together in my head, and I'm absolutely useless. So please don't do that. So whereas, you know, I class myself more on the creative and intuitive side, but not necessarily on the analytical and, say, mathematical side. But everyone's different. But even the most staunch, analytical, logical, mathematical people, I do think have an element of creativity in them. I don't think you have one without the other. So why is creativity important? Well, for a start, I think it's very motivating. It motivates you when you build something. You know, even if you have like a big bucket of Lego and you build a nice, interesting model with it, you kind of feel motivated when you build something. Or even if you have a Lego, you know, Star Wars Star Destroyer, and you follow, you know, the 300-page instruction book, and you end up with a model at the end of it. You know, that kind of feels good when you do it. You feel like you've achieved something. And creative thinking really does help with problem solving, because people that are creative can normally look differently at an existing problem. So if you have someone who's looking at a problem very analytically, you could have someone who's a bit more creative and adds a bit more feeling to the same problem. They might come up with a perfectly valid but completely different solution to solving the same problem, which is why having the mix between the two people on a team I think is very important. Creativity makes you productive. I think it makes you productive because you're motivated and you want to do more and you want to be better at what you do, so you hone your craft. And because of that, it also boosts your confidence. So I don't know if anyone's ever had a day where you're feeling a bit off and you go and do something creative, whether it's a bit of photography or painting or some music. It kind of gets those endorphins running around your brain and you kind of feel better for it. And it gives you more self-confidence. Obviously, it lets you express yourself. As a species, we love to express ourselves creatively, which is very important. It brings people together, relieves stress, and apparently it helps you live longer, which is great. So go do a painting, it'll add years to your life. Now, kind of the area that I want to sort of breach in, which is kind of based around my own kind of feelings, which may resonate with some of you, or you may just think I'm completely stark raving mad. But I kind of want to talk to you about a story about what it's been like over the last 18 months. So, like many people, we've had lockdowns and we've had this whole problem with the disease that shall not be named. And kind of when I was in lockdown, I started having a bit of an existential crisis. I'm kind of the wrong side of 45, and apparently this is quite normal when you're rapidly approaching 50 to have feelings like this. But it's kind of amplified by lockdown. And I was, like a lot of people, I was a bit depressed with the situation, stuck at home, 2 children, both with learning difficulties that we're trying to educate for months and months at a time, was challenging and stressful. And I started asking myself some really quite unhealthy questions, like, what have I been doing with my life up to this point? And most of what I've created in my career doesn't exist anymore. And that really started to bother me. It got me thinking, how long does your work survive without you? And this is why the talk title talks about the legacy of our work. It's kind of how we apply our legacy. So I look back at my career. I've had an interesting career. I've got no complaints. I've done some really cool things. I've been a professional developer for about 25 to 27 years or so. I can't remember exactly. And I started out working in video games back in the 90s. Which is amazing. I was young, free, single. I didn't mind working 18-hour days to get a game out because it was fun and exciting back then. Couldn't do it now. I need my sleep. But back then it was cool. So some of the games I worked on, Croc, Legend of the Gobos on the Colour Game Boy. Amazing product. Not available anymore. You can't buy it. The machine doesn't exist anymore that you play it on. You can kind of play it through emulators and it works, but how long are they going to be supported for? And it's a bit of a faff to get emulators up and running. For my sins, I did some work on the Alien Resurrection game on the original PlayStation. Thankfully, I wasn't credited because I was only brought in to help fix bugs towards the end. But we were not Fox's best friends at the end of that because the game came out a year after the film. Oops. Plagued with problems. And then the thing on the right is a development tool I worked on for a company called Criterion Software, which was eventually bought by Electronic Arts. And it was called Renderware and Renderware Studio. And the best way to describe it is, does everyone know what Unity is? So this was Unity 7 years before Unity came out. This is kind of the similar sort of style, and we sold it for a hell of a lot of money to game studios. The idea was you have your games consoles, so the PlayStation 2 it was at the time, the original Xbox and the GameCube, I believe it was. You had a network connection to all of these consoles, and you drag assets into the window, it updates on the consoles. You have your C++ behaviours, you drag those onto the assets. You set up events and triggers and stuff like that, and then as you're doing that, you can run around playing the game. It was really quite groundbreaking at the time. We take it for granted in Unity these days, but it was really amazing. But the problem is that doesn't exist either. It was bought by Electronic Arts, the technology was consumed into other development tools, and pretty much everything that me and my team at the time worked on just doesn't exist anymore. Which is kind of sad, because I spent a long time working on it. When I left the games industry, I worked for an online bank called Egg in the UK. It was the UK's first digital-only bank. So it was cool, it was a really amazing thing to work on. I single-handedly created the vast majority of the Cash ISA savings product, which was brilliant, but again, sadly, it doesn't exist anymore. The company was bought out by Citigroup. They made it massively profitable and then broke the company up and sold it off to the highest bidders. So all of those systems don't exist anymore, which is a shame. Spent a lot of time working on that, pouring my heart and soul into these products. It doesn't exist anymore. Story goes on. Dollar Financial Corporation, large retail finance company in the US. Spent a long time there working on retail point-of-sale systems for our stores. Don't exist anymore. Most of the stores have been closed down, which is a shame. Currently, I build courses for Pluralsight. Now, all that stuff does still exist. It is still there. I've been doing it for the last 7 years. Absolutely love it, no complaints. Brilliant company to work with, fantastic people that are there, and fantastic people that watch our courses. But I know that as soon as I stop updating those courses, or if anything happens to me, they'll get retired and they'll drop off and they'll disappear. So there is kind of no legacy to that work. It's a transient, it's like a puff of smoke in the wind. It's kind of only there while you care about it, and then it's gone, which is a real shame. So this concerns me. That's my concerned face. And it really starts bothering me that knowledge work that doesn't exist anymore, for me, is starting to be a problem. Now, it's probably because I'm in my 40s. Apparently, this is part of a midlife crisis. A few people have pointed this out to me. But, you know, I can't really see everyone, so I can't see how old everyone is. But some of you may be closer to that. Some of you maybe not so close yet. But you'll get there. So the problem is most of our output is transient in nature. And I don't mean that to be negative. What we do to earn a living, to feed our families, is important, but it is transient. If you stop working on it, it will disappear over time. And that really started to bother me. So it's like, you know, what is my legacy? If something was to happen to me, especially with, you know, the virus that we will not mention, for example, how would anyone remember me? And I don't mean that to be kind of big-headed. I'm kind of talking like in the family spheres. Like how would I be remembered within my family, for example? And the people I really care about are my kids. There's my 2 children there, Amy and Daniel. So, you know, what will they think of me in the years to come? How will they remember their dad, apart from just being their dad? And I started researching this, and there's an interesting technique you can do. It seems a bit morbid, so I'm going to explain it first. But it's where you basically write what's going to go on your tombstone, and then you kind of analyse how you feel about what you're going to write on it. So it does feel a bit morbid, I do appreciate that, but we'll go through the exercise anyway, just because it's fun. So, Stephen Horns, 1976 to 2000 something, developed amazing corporate enterprise banking software. Nah, nobody cares. Okay, all right. Stephen Horns developed the best retail finance APIs in the world. And these APIs were brilliant. Really, really good. No one cares. Okay. Records amazing corporate online training. And believe me, my course on conflict resolution, brilliant. You know, I feel very privileged that I've helped train hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people all over the world with my courses on there. I'm very, very proud of it. But is it kind of, you know, would I put it on my tombstone? Not really. Okay, so something a bit more creative, which a lot of people don't know that I do, but I'm really into music production, and I like recording bone-chilling industrial ambient music and ambient noise. Very small audience of people that actually like that sort of stuff. If you search for my name on Spotify or Apple Music or Deezer or Bandcamp, you'll find it, and it's an acquired taste. I like it. It's kind of very dark and a bit demonic in places. Most people generally aren't going to care. It's a very niche genre of music, shall we say. And, you know, worked on computer games that are no longer available. I mean, yeah, you know, these games, you know, they sold well at the time. They did fairly well at the time, but nobody really knows about them now. You know, machines move on. You get a cycle of new machines coming out, then everything else gets forgotten, apart from a few hobbyists and enthusiasts. So I was like, well, what can I do? I'm creative. I want to do something that's going to last. What can last longer than me? Now, everyone's answer to this question would be different. It all depends on, you know, your personality, what you like doing, and so on. So it's like, what can I do that is creatively fulfilling, that can last longer than me? And, most importantly, what will make my children proud of me in the future? You know, if something happens to me and, you know, they're there with their kids, their grandkids, they're talking about their granddad. Probably not that far off from it, to be honest. Being a granddad, that is. What will they say? They're not going to talk about my corporate enterprise software and those brilliant finance APIs. So my answer is actually something that I've kind of always had an idea that I want to do, but I've always been a bit scared to approach it because it felt complicated and difficult. But that was writing fiction, you know, writing stories. Specifically children's stories. I've kind of always had lots of ideas around it, but always been a bit intimidated to do it because when you pick up a novel, it always feels flawless and perfect. What I didn't appreciate at the time is that author has probably gone through those stories about 15 times and then had them ripped to pieces by an editor, then another editor, and then a copy editor, which is why a lot of books feel so good when you pick them up in the bookstore. So I thought, okay, well, I've had lots of story ideas and lots of really weird and wacky ideas. So I started writing a load of short stories over lockdown. Did a collection of about 15 short stories, about 3,000 to 4,000 words each. And because I run a content development business, I have editors that I've worked with for non-fiction work. So I hired the editors and said, can you just take a look over this? Because a lot of them have worked for large fiction publishing companies. They looked over it and they're like, yeah, this is good, this needs changing, you need to explain this more. So there's a process of working with it. And in the end, I was like, I actually really like what I've done here. Maybe I should look at trying to put these out. Well, children like illustrations in books, so I hired an illustrator. There's a few of the images there that come back from the illustrator. I'm not going to talk too much about the guy in the pink tutu. It's quite a funny story about a guy who's scared of wasps, and he gets attacked by a wasp, and it turns out he's actually an amazing dancer. It's very weird. So whilst I was doing this, I'm the sort of person where if I have a new idea and I look at something new, I basically want to learn everything there is about it. So I was reading blog posts, reading books, taking online courses. LinkedIn Learning is particularly good for creative writing courses. Not sure if I'm supposed to talk about the enemy when I'm a Pluralsight author, but their creative courses are pretty good. Took all the classes on masterclass.com to do with writing. Some brilliant ones on there, people like Neil Gaiman and Margaret Atwood. And I was like, this is great. I'm really enjoying this, but I actually want to learn properly, like a proper accredited course. I was like, well, how can I learn? Can I go to university and do a master's in creative writing? Probably. But I spoke to some other writers that I know, and they recommended a course called Faber Academy, which is run by the publisher Faber and Faber. And their impression was, well, do you want to be taught by an academic who's probably never published anything, who's just there to teach you theory, or do you want to be taught by best-selling New York Times selling authors? So yeah, that sounds good. I'll have a bit of that. So I'm currently halfway through doing that course. It's due to finish about May or June next year. And it's been brilliant, absolutely eye-opening. It's probably the best course I think I've ever done in my life. But through this, I've kind of met lots of other people. And you know when you get an idea and you start pulling at it and different things start happening and you start getting different ideas. Well, I met another person who I'm actually going to go into business with. And we thought, the publishing model around traditional publishing is broken at the moment. It's very archaic in how authors are treated by a lot of traditional publishers. So we think we can do better. So next year we're looking to start up a creative company called Adventures in Writing, where partly it's to help unpublished authors get onto the marketplace, and also to run workshops in schools, which is something we're looking at doing. So we're just going through an accreditation process for that at the moment. And our idea was, a lot of publishers these days, because they take all the risk, they pay all the money up front for editors and designers and copy editing, because they take all that risk on, they don't take many new authors on, and they pay a really low royalty rate, typically 10 to 15% of net receipts. So we're like, well, what if we had a publishing company where you can have a sliding scale, for example, where an author could choose to take on more risk, which means they get a higher percentage of the profits. So this is kind of something we're playing around with at the minute. So if an author comes to us and we want to publish them, but they're willing to pay for the editing themselves and the graphic design, and we do typesetting, marketing and printing, because they're sharing the risk with them, then actually we might pay them 60% of the royalty and 40% to the company. Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of like a sliding scale. So this is something that we're experimenting with. But the reason I'm talking about this is it's like, you take one idea which you think is going to be creative, and then you start learning as much as you can about it, and then you just don't know where it's going to take you. So all this has come from me having a bit of an existential crisis during lockdown last year. And it's now kind of actually turning into something that I'm actually going to start looking at doing more full-time, which is quite cool. So if we test the idea on the tombstone. So Stephen Haunts, 1976 to 2000 and something or other, entertains children through stories. I like that. That's approved. To me, that actually feels like a nice thing to have. If someone actually remembers you for something that you've written story-wise, I personally think that's quite heartwarming. I like that. And the thing I like about fiction is that it doesn't really die. I mean, you can go to Gutenberg Project online and you can download ASCII files of books that were written hundreds of years ago. There's no crazy encoding formats that are going to go out of date. You're not dependent on technology and different systems going in and out of date. It's just text. So as a medium, it can transcend technical barriers, which I think is quite poetic in a way. So who knows? In the future, I could be sitting there, probably a lot less hair than I've got now, with the grandkids reading them stories that I've written. I think that sounds quite nice. Now, just because I've kind of had this decision and I've kind of, taken one creative idea and I've tried to mould it into something else, what about everything else that I do, the things that I do to earn a living today? I mean, I still do all that. There's nothing wrong with it. I still very much enjoy software development. I love the creative challenge of it. I'm still going to make courses for Pluralsight because that's kind of what I do as part of my job. I still love it. It's just not what I class as my legacy. It's work. It's good work. I work with fantastic people that I really like. But it's no longer my legacy. It's not the final thing that's going to drive me to do what I want to do. It's just a means to earn a living. So we looked earlier about, kind of what creativity is. And we talked about, it motivates you, helps with problem solving, helps you be productive, boosts your confidence, lets you express yourself, brings people together, relieves stress, helps you live longer because you're exercising your mental muscle, which is all very true. But why is creativity important to me, from my perspective? Well, doing writing comes from my mind alone. I don't have to work with a team to do it. I can do it whenever I want. I can write whenever I want. I mean, hell, I've written 2 chapters of a book while I've been here in Oslo, in between sessions. I don't need to involve anyone else initially. I don't have a big team of people that I need to work with. When you're actually writing the stories or writing the books, it's just you and the keyboard and your ideas. You don't involve other people until the editorial stage, right down the line. It's creatively rewarding. I feel good once I've done it, once I've written something and that I like it and I've revised it. And I can involve my kids as well. So a lot of the short stories that I wrote have things from our lives and experiences that we've had as a family that have been kind of integrated into the story. So for them, there's kind of this extra little level of stuff that they'll recognise when they read them. And I've also found that your children can be your harshest critics as well, especially my son. My son's autistic, so he can be brutally honest, which is helpful and alarming at times. So will many people read these stories? I don't know. Will I earn a living from doing this small business? Maybe, I don't know. Obviously, I want it to at least break even. Will it ever become my full-time job? Who knows? I'd like it to be. But, it doesn't really matter. It's something that I find creatively fulfilling. I think everyone should try and find that one thing that makes them creatively fulfilled, that they know is going to, last longer than them. Now, for you, that may be software development and the stuff that you do, and you may have, GitHub projects and you have lots of maintainers. That's brilliant. If that's kind of what makes you creatively fulfilled, then that's brilliant. So the key takeaways from this part of the talk then is, I think it's good to look at what you do and what you enjoy doing, but look at the longevity of it. Is it going to be a puff of smoke in the wind, or is it going to be a raging fire that can't be put out? I like that analogy. I just thought of that on the spot. And think about how do you want to be remembered? And framing it in reference of your family, I think, is a good thing to do here. How would you be remembered in 10 years' time, apart from just being someone's dad or someone's mum or whatnot? How would you be remembered when people talk about you around the Christmas dinner table? Again, as part of that, who are the most important people to your legacy? For me, it was kind of my own children. They were kind of like the linchpin that helped drive a lot of my thought process in this. But also, more than anything, do what makes you happy. Pick something that makes you feel creatively fulfilled. You don't have to worry about the commercial aspects of it. If you enjoy painting, you don't have to sell them. You can just do it just for the sheer hell of doing it, because it makes you feel good. And I think that's very important. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily do that because we're so busy with our professional lives. I mean, I looked at what I was doing. I've spent over 20 years just pushing data to a database, pushing it back, updating it, then pushing it back into a database. Solving the same problems over and over and over again for 20 years, but with different frameworks. So it's kind of nice to break out and do something else. Okay, so some creative techniques that you can use at work. Now, some of these are kind of more fun, I'd say. Probably not your usual innovation techniques. I mean, I'm not going to talk about SWOT analysis or anything like that, although SWOT analysis is a good technique for assessing ideas. So we talked about one which is the tombstone idea, and this is more of a personal one. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily do this with a group of people. He says doing this with a group of people. But it's a good way of solidifying what's important to you. But we've covered that one in depth, so I'm not going to go into too much more detail about it. Now, if you're working on systems at work or you're working on your own kind of ideas and creative ideas, whenever you work on something, you always instinctively know what's good and what's not good. There's compromises in everything that we do. And whenever we build software, for example, there's always stuff that we think, ooh, that's not very good. But sometimes it can be difficult to actually break into a habit of actually doing something about it. So a really good technique, and again, this is something that you do personally, you don't have to share it with people, is you write reviews for what you're working on, which kind of sounds a bit weird, but it does work. So one technique is you write lots of positive reviews. So if you imagine, whatever your favourite newspaper or magazine is, and they're writing a review of what you've done, and they love it, what would they say? What would give you that 8 or 9 star review? But then, think about the flaws in what you're building or what you're doing, and write a negative review. Be really honest, have this internal reviewer in your mind really, really lay into you and have a go at what it is you're building. Because sometimes just by getting this down on paper or on in Word or whatever, and then leaving it for a week or two and then coming back to it and rereading it, it kind of really helps form more of a guided opinion in your mind, and it helps you formulate a plan. Because sometimes it can be really hard to look at the flaws in our own systems, and sometimes we don't want to look at the flaws in what we build. But by doing this exercise, it forces you to actually focus on the things that are wrong so that you can then derive a plan to improve. It's a very powerful technique. One that's probably a bit more familiar to people is mind mapping and brainstorming, or thought showering is the other term for it these days. And this is where you might have a whiteboard or you might have some software, and you write a problem in the middle of the page, payment system for X, whatever. And then you start drawing lots of different spiders coming out of it, and you write down different ideas and solutions, and then you break those ideas down. You end up with a massive big spider diagram of kind of ideas and solutions, which you can then take away and sort of analyse and break it down and actually use that to form the basis of a design. That's a really good technique, but another technique counter to that is what's called negative brainstorming, which not a lot of people do, but it's fun and it's very powerful. So you have an idea, but instead of writing sensible ideas down, you write completely stupid ideas down. Because by doing that, it can sometimes trick your brain into coming up with good solutions. So if we've got an example here, a story about a dragon. Well, the dragon's name is Jeff. He murders a squirrel with a toothbrush. He rides bareback on a spaceback rocket, and he likes to eat children in a hot dog bun. Completely silly ideas. But then, you can say, well, his name is Jeff. Well, maybe he was a knight, and he was called Sir Jeff, and he double-crossed a witch, and she turned him into a dragon. Okay, well, that could work. Or maybe he didn't murder a squirrel with a toothbrush, but maybe he befriends a squirrel, and he's too scared to come out of his cave because evil people try to hurt him. So the squirrel goes and does things for him. Maybe. I don't know. Okay, maybe he's not going to ride bareback on a SpaceX rocket, but maybe he's a dragon with very small wings and he can't fly. So the squirrel helps him build some contraption, like Leonardo da Vinci style, to help him fly, maybe. I mean, that's kind of a very silly example, but by thinking up negative ideas or silly ideas to a solution, it can sometimes help push your mind into thinking up sensible solutions. So if you're ever stuck in a brainstorming situation, go to a new page and think of silly ideas. Because silly ideas always end up becoming turned into good ideas, which is quite cool. A more traditional creative style is the six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono. So he's someone clever, he knows what he's talking about. But the idea here is you think about different ideas, but you put a different hat on when you're doing it. It's like looking at a problem through different lenses. So, for example, we've got facts, benefits, cautions, ideas, feelings, and process. So if you're designing a solution, say a payment system, for example, you might put your facts hat on, and you think, well, what are the facts about this system? Well, the facts are I need to support, MasterCard and Visa and American Express. And the facts are that I'm going to have to pay a certain percentage transaction fee. You think about just the pure raw facts around what it is you're trying to do. I have to be PCI DSS certified. I can't store CVV numbers of people's cards. Just the raw facts. And then you take that hat off and you put your benefits hat on. Well, what are the benefits of this system? Why, if I build this, what's going to be the benefit to my end user? Are there any benefits? Should you just use Stripe instead? Maybe. But you might think, well, actually, no, if I build this system, this payment system, actually it could be useful for anyone, so I could actually turn it into a product. And I could be the next Stripe, for example. So you think about what the benefits of building that system are to you. Then you put your cautions hat on. Well, what are the things that can really bite me here? What can get me into trouble? Well, transaction fees can change from credit card providers arbitrarily. If anyone heard that in the UK, Amazon's going to stop supporting, I think it's MasterCard credit cards, or is it Visa credit cards? One of the two, because the transaction fees have gone up. So Amazon has said, nope, I'm not supporting those cards anymore from January. That is a risk, isn't it? So yeah, cautions are thinking about the things that could get you into trouble. Regulatory compliance, that's something that always trips companies up because it's hard. If you don't set your systems up correctly, you put yourself into scope of a massive PCI DSS audit, which is expensive and painful for everyone. So those are the cautions. Then you put your ideas hat on and you just start coming up with the brainstorming techniques of lots of different ideas. How can we make this system different to Stripe? Are we going to offer hosted iframes that you put your card numbers in? Are we going to, I don't know, can't think of anything off the top of my head. Not worked on payment systems for a while. But this is where you just think of your general ideas and what could potentially become feature sets. Then you put your feelings hat on. And feelings is kind of where you start thinking about, certainly in terms of software development, trying to make it relevant to the conference. But this could be where you start thinking about different personas of people that might be using your system and how they feel. So you might have a persona which is the young 30-year-old professional who likes to buy sandwiches online. Or you've got the mum at home who needs to go and buy provisions for the family. Do you know what I mean? The different personas. And you start thinking about how they feel about using your system. So is the system designed to be easy to use? Are there any barriers to entry? How many clicks have you got to go through to make a payment? It's where you start thinking about how different design choices can affect different people as you go through the design process. And then the final one, you take that hat off and you put the process hat on. This is where you start looking at the actual physical process of what you're going to build. So you really, at this point, you're starting to get into more of a larger design, or breaking it down into stories if it's agile. You have to be careful when you talk about building a design, people go, no, in agile you don't do that. Well, you start going into more detail and more depth. So another technique, and I've used this I haven't used it, I've been the recipient of it in creativity workshops in companies I've worked at. And this is a really, really good icebreaker. If you've got a lot of people in a room and you're going to have a big, long workshop to try and think up ideas, especially if you've got people in there that you don't ordinarily work with from around the business, so everyone's a bit new and a bit nervous. There's a technique called blind storytelling. It's brilliant fun, really, really good fun. So what you do is the first person has a go and they write 2 or 3 sentences in a paragraph. There was a dragon called Jeff and he lived with a squirrel called Cyril and he lived in a big cave. Then what you do is you fold the paper over and you just leave the last sentence. So he lived in a big cave. Then the next person has no idea what came before it except for that sentence. So they then write 2 or 3 sentences. They fold the paper over, leave the last sentence. Then the next person has a go. And by the time you've done this 10 times around the room, and people can write whatever they want, you then read the story out as a whole, and it's normally incredibly silly and has everyone in hysterics laughing, which is a really good icebreaker. It's a good party game as well. If you've ever got the family around the Christmas table and it starts getting a bit awkward because Grandpa said something a bit rude, you can just start playing this game, which is really cool. Okay, so sort of towards the end of what I wanted to say, so just to summarise then, so creativity I think is hugely important. I think a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into it. A lot of people are just trying to get their job done. You want to get your job done, go home, or whatnot. But actually learning how to be creative and applying yourself to anything else outside your job, whether it's painting, music, arts, Lego, making the garden look nice, it doesn't matter what it is, I think it's hugely important and hugely beneficial. I think everyone has a creative part of them, so there are people that are more right brain dominant and there are people that are more left brain dominant. But I don't think you ever have one truly without the other. I just think some people don't necessarily exercise all the other skills as well. So I class myself as very right brain dominant. I'm okay with logic stuff. I've been a software developer for a long time. Maths, I'm hopeless at. Maybe I could practice that a bit more, but maybe I'm too far gone for that. But it's kind of good to look at kind of, those ideas around the brain there and kind of try and work out where you think you lie. Are you someone who's more right brain dominant? Are you quite creative and you look at very feelings-based solutions to problems? Or are you very analytical, mathematical, and it's about facts and numbers and logic? there's no problems either way. It's just good to understand where you lie. And sometimes it's good if you are, say, more left brain dominant and more analytical, maybe doing a few more creative things is actually going to help sort of exercise that other part of your brain, which is quite good. So we talked a bit about why creativity is important. I've already gone through this slide a couple of times, so I won't necessarily do it again, but it is very motivating to be able to express yourself in kind of creative and artistic ways. And it does relieve stress. It's very relaxing. So now if ever I'm stressed with something or I've got something difficult to do, I just go and work on some of the writing stuff that I'm doing, and that kind of helps calm me down. That's quite common with a lot of people. The big thing that I wanted to talk about again was not just creativity, but looking at your legacy as well, thinking a bit further forward about, how might you and your work be remembered in the future when the inevitable happens. So when you're a lot younger, like in your 20s and early 30s, you don't normally tend to worry about things like this. But when you get into your 40s, I think these things do become a bit more common. They call it a midlife crisis. Some people deal with it in different ways. I quit my job as soon as I turned 40. It was a calculated plan, but I quit my job to work on pluralsight stuff full time. My friends thought I was having a midlife crisis. I got loads of texts saying, "You're right. You quit your job, what's wrong?" But it was planned. Some people buy sports cars or speedboats or motorbikes. Some people might, just take up new hobbies and try creating different things just to do the things that they've always put off and regret putting off from earlier in their life. And again, think about who it is you're doing this for. So for me, it was my children. For a lot of people, if you've got kids, it normally is your kids, because that's kind of what we do everything for, to bring them up safely. But then, start looking at what you've done through your life and start thinking in terms of the tombstone technique. So it does feel a bit morbid when you discuss it to a room full of people looking at you. But it's not meant to be morbid. It's just an exercise for you to analyse the things that you do and kind of where they stack in their relative importance in your life. I showed one that says, Stephen wrote great enterprise financial software or whatever. I'm not saying that's not important. They were very rewarding years of my life. I did some really good projects. But they're not what matters. And I can now see that they're not what matters in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, so looking at the longevity of your work, think about how you want to be remembered and kind of help use that as a way of guiding how you work in the future. Kind of the main message I wanted to give across. If you are on Pluralsight, I've got an innovation course on there which you may find useful, called Innovation in the Workplace. I do talk about SWOT analysis in that one, because it is a good innovation technique. And it talks about how you can work within a team and use various different techniques to help innovate within your organisation, which may or may not be useful to you. I'm also, as well as doing stories, I've been doing non-fiction writing for quite a few years now. So I've got 2 books there which people might find interesting. The one on the left, The Path to Freedom, is about how to start up and run a business for people that are terrified of the idea of setting up and starting a business. A lot of people fear starting up businesses. I did a talk based around that yesterday, so when NDC publishes the talks on YouTube, hopefully soon, you'll be able to see the talk for that one. And I've got another book called The Art of Conversation, which is about how to refine your social skills for people that are maybe a little bit more wary of striking up conversations in the workplace or in life. It's about how to kind of break through some of your anxieties about communicating with people. So with that, thank you very much. We've finished slightly early. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, fine. Well, I should let you get to the coffee queue before everyone else comes out of their sessions. Thank you very much.